College football nerds, y'all knew we were going to talk about this one. It's Penn State, it's Oregon. It is a huge game in the Big Ten and a huge game in the college football landscape. I got my Josh with me. We're going to get nerdy with y'all. And I want to remind y'all, since it is week 5, there's 4 games of data. Our model has released. Our website has been refreshed with all the data. So collegefootballnerds.com. You can go check it out. You can model any 2 teams against one another. You can see all of our beautiful team profiles and relative performance statistics and our 1 through 136 ranking that our model does every week from here on out. Just a little plug. It's free, y'all. Go have fun. Go crazy. I think you'll love it. Again, it doesn't cost you anything. It's a lot of fun. All right, Josh, this game is interesting to me because we talked in our recap, our week 4 reaction video. It was pretty long, deep dive. If you want to check it out, it's actually really good. One of the things we talked about is how humans are overly influenced, and the pollsters too are overly influenced by big blowouts against lesser teams. And the one thing we don't know about Oregon or Penn State at this point is who they are against good teams, because of the blowouts. But Oregon's blowouts have been very acute and very like what they did to Oklahoma State was something serious. And so I think we've been like in our mind just really overly influenced by, those big numbers. But a lot of teams, especially teams that run the type of offense that Oregon does and has for a while, run into scaling issues against good teams. And I think Vegas is kind of picking up on that because I'm also influenced by these big spreads. I gotta admit. And so when I saw this point spread, I was kind of surprised. But Vegas might think that Oregon's going to run into some scaling issues.
Yeah, it is interesting because when you look at the current Vegas odds for this, one of the things that stands out is that the over/under is 52.5. Right, it has Penn State minus 3.5. Over under at 52.5, and that's a 26-26 bowl game is what you're wagering on. And I think people would expect a Penn State game because their style of play and style, defensive ball, run first football team, play action with Allar tend to be shorter games. We've talked a lot about football in general. Scoring is down, not so much because teams are worse on offense, but actually just because games are shorter. That's proven out pretty well. But even still, this is a lower scoring game. And I think to your point, Oregon has had issues the last couple years with this high-flying spread offense not translating really well against higher levels of competition. Now, I say all that fully understanding. Oregon last year played this team called Penn State at the end of the year and threw for, 58 billion yards approximately. It's actually only 283. Wasn't that crazy, but did put up 45 points in that ball game, 8 yards per attempt, but 4 touchdowns. I still, though, think that maybe had a little bit to do with what Penn State was. That was kind of a game that got into shootout mode. Sometimes these competitive games kind of get in a weird place like that, where, frankly, a lot of it is that teams are having to press more and more, and if they're in rhythm, the score goes up. But in general, I think a lot of it has to do with pacing and spacing. So when you're playing a high-level defense and you're trying to throw the ball short as much as Oregon does, right? Bo Nix famously, I think, threw more passes within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage than anybody. That is really predicated on the idea that you're getting the ball to your player in space, and then your player is faster than their player, so he can take the ball in space and then move upfield before he can be tackled. There's a reason they don't run that in the NFL, and that's as the level of defense increases, the amount of space that exists by the time you get to the ball to the perimeter will shrink. And typically, the talent advantages you have at receiver also shrinks. So if you're playing a team that closes space quickly on the perimeter and they have guys to run with your receivers, you're not going to have the kind of spacing to be able to run that offense and have crazy results. Something I saw a lot when I looked at Oregon's tape versus the competition they played to this way, like even the Northwestern game, which was kind of sluggish. Northwestern never tackled on the first tackle. Like the first guy to the wide receiver never got him to the ground. They either couldn't get to him because of athleticism, or if they got to him, they were off angle and they weren't physical enough to bring him to the ground. They had 1,000,000 yards after contact. And Daniel, one of the things I kind of question is, last year, even in the Penn State game when they were successful, a lot of that was because you had Tez Johnson, you had Trayshawn Holden, you had Evan Stewart. You had some really, really talented, extremely athletic players in that wide receiving core that made plays on a really consistent basis. I know they're still talented at wide receiver. I think Dante Moore, there's a reason he was a 5-star out of high school, but he's still a freshman. But I don't know that Malik Benson and Kenyon Sadiq are the guys that you're going to lean on as wide receivers and tight ends, the only guys with over 150 yards that are going to just juke Penn State's secondary out of their shoes. So I do think things are probably going to slow down a lot. I think it's probably not going to scale great. I don't think it's going to be like what Tez Johnson did to Penn State last year, where it felt like they just couldn't cover him to save their lives. I maybe Corian Moore is that guy, but I think he's more a typical downfield receiver. I think, Daniel, that they're going to struggle to have this just constant burn, spread passing attack. And I think this game, especially on Oregon side, is going to be more of a traditional pro-style offense, at least when they find success. And it's going to be more about hitting seam shots, hitting hole shots in zone, making things happen occasionally, and a lot more painful of a grind than I think we'd seen from them the past few weeks.
Josh, I got a question for you.
Okay.
Do you like paying full price for things, or do you prefer to save 10% when you can?
I mean, I'm a penny pitching lawyer. I love to save money where I can.
Well, you're in luck because we're partnering with SeatGeek this year. And with codes NERDS10, you can save 10% on tickets at SeatGeek. And they've got a lot of cool college football games. We're a college football channel. They also have other stuff like concerts and things like that. But we got Bama, Georgia coming up this weekend. I'm going to show it on the screen for people. We got the game at the end of the year, Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama, Auburn, Iron Bowl. Even the cocktail party is going to have some tickets for y'all. So SeatGeek is partnering with us, and I'm just curious, any games that you want to see? Are you going to stay on your couch all year? You got something in mind?
Well, I've never really experienced human companionship, and also as a nerd, I've only ever watched box scores. So given that I'm probably going to pick LSU to win, I'd kind of like to go to an LSU game. I mean, don't you think they'd be excited to have me?
I'm probably more excited than Penn State fans would be to have you. But, Josh, there's a problem with this. I think we found a flaw in your system. You can get some good prices on tickets, but do you want to know what the problem is?
What's the problem, Daniel?
You'll have to wear pants.
Oh, I've never done that before. And also, I think I have to pick them to lose if they want me to come.
All right. So, of course, we got the code for y'all, Nerds10, to save 10% off on your next tickets at SeatGeek. Make sure you click on the link in the description and download the app, and you can have the code automatically added to your account so you can use it later. I want to thank SeatGeek. They've been a great partner. This is 2 years running with them. We appreciate it. Y'all go check them out. On the other side of the ball, Penn State fans are notoriously upset with us because we're not high on Drew Allar. And look, I think that we've been proven out fairly correct in our stance on him, that he's not the guy that he was rated coming out of high school. There was a lot of, not great evals at that time, but he's not a bad quarterback. And we've really never maintained that he was a bad quarterback. He's just not. He's got a lot of measurements, but he's not the guy. Like 7.2 versus Villanova, 6 something versus FIU. These aren't good. 6.1 yards per attempt on 33 passes versus FIU. He is who he is at this point, and he is a guy that's not going to throw you into a win. Now, we said about John Mateer in Oklahoma that John Mateer's not going to throw you into a win. The difference is Oklahoma can't run the ball. Even against bad teams, Oklahoma can't run the ball. Penn State has maintained through Allar's tenure a good running game, sometimes great running game. So there's the difference in that if you take what I'm saying about Allar, look, the data is in. He is who he is. If he has a great year through the rest of the year and just turns into somebody who hasn't been up to this point for 4 years of his career, that's who he is. He's got a run game and a physical offensive line and a good defense, so he can play complementary football, and he doesn't have to throw for 9.8 yards per attempt. And he doesn't have to put up 4 touchdowns and 300 yards to win every game because he's got all the other pieces around him. But one thing I don't think I've ever really noted with Allar that I think is fair is I don't think he has a high ceiling. I don't think he has a high ceiling as an NFL quarterback or, like I said, a guy that's going to go out there and win you a game with his arm. But he also doesn't have a low floor. I think his floor is actually pretty high. I think he is going to be that between 6.5 and 7.5 yards per attempt guy that's not super efficient, irrespective of him playing Villanova or Oregon. I just think that's kind of who he is. And Josh, if Oregon runs into scaling issues, you actually only need a guy with a pretty high floor, and you don't need a high ceiling guy, because a lot of times when offenses run into scaling issues, they can go from like 9 yards an attempt to 4 yards an attempt.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, I don't know that I completely agree on the ceiling, because I do think, like, Allar was evaluated because he's a really big, tall guy with a cannon for an arm. My complaint with him is that his arm's very inconsistent and his mechanics fall apart at times. Um, he doesn't always set his feet well, and in a lot of crunch moments, sometimes he just really, really struggles. And I've always said the key mark for a quarterback is how well do you do when you get moved off your spot? And Allar doesn't always answer that question well. But to your point, I do think he has a pretty high floor. Like, he's going to get you yardage. And the reason I actually think he may translate to the NFL is in the NFL, your ability, look, if you can miss throws, the question is, can you make a throw in a tight window or throw the ball downfield? Because it may be the only thing that works. And guys that are, take a guy like Mateer. I don't know that Mateer has much of a future in the NFL because he doesn't have an absolute rocket of an arm. And he's a gamer that runs around and creates, and that stuff doesn't work. It doesn't translate. Your question is, can you rifle a ball downfield, which Allar can do. I do think he was a COVID eval. They didn't have camps, all that. He kind of, there's a lot of those guys reclassified and whatnot. And there were a lot of, like yours, were a lot of weird evals in that period. But, I mean, I do think it's fair. But I'll turn it around a little bit, Daniel, and talk about Dante Moore, which we've seen a few years for Dante Moore. 2 years ago, when he was starting at UCLA as a young player, he was an interception machine. Some of that might have been due to the offense. Now, UCLA was a bad team, but they weren't as bad as they have been the past couple of years. But to some degree, he just had bad decision making when he got off his spot. He kind of made crazy throws. Sometimes it felt like he was almost blind. You didn't know who he was going to be. And that was a dangerous thing. And we've seen him play really well, but what I've noticed in the past few games is he does leave clean pockets. He'll turn his back to the line of scrimmage and run away from pressure. Those are things that work versus bad competition that get you destroyed versus good competition. So whereas Haller, I think, has a pretty high floor that I think you're going to kind of get what you get out of him, I don't know what Dante Moore is. I know he has a really high ceiling. His arm talent is through the roof, but I don't know what it's going to look like if you can contain him in the pocket and make him throw uncomfortable, or especially if you make him speed up his progressions. Is that tendency towards turnovers going to come back out? Because I think that's really the real question here.
One of the things we really haven't touched on much is the fact that this is at home for Penn State, and they had a bye while Oregon had to prepare for Oregon State. And look, Oregon State's not good. Oregon could do all their prep work for Penn State a week ahead and still beat Oregon State. So from that standpoint, I don't think it's a huge advantage, but it is some advantage. You rest up, you get ready, and then you play host to Oregon. Of all the Big Ten stadiums, these are the two teams with the two loudest. And it's funny because they're opposite styles, and they weren't even in the same conference a couple years ago. But Oregon gets super loud. People don't understand it. Like, Beaver Stadium has already this sort of fairly earned a reputation for being super loud, but so does Oregon. Oregon's used to playing in loud environments, but I do think that this is a bit of an advantage for Penn State, and that might be something of what Vegas is playing into with this 3-point spread. Our model is actually pretty close in terms of thinking kind of like what Vegas is thinking, 24.3 to 23.3, with Penn State being a 1-point advantage in this situation. And what's interesting is both of these teams kind of see their yards per play go down a good bit. And I think that, Penn State's probably a little more comfortable playing in these lower scoring games because that's kind of who they've been for a while, and Oregon wants to kind of really put the points on the board. But it is interesting to me. It's a little lower scoring even than Vegas thinks. But Josh, I don't know that the model is crazy. I'm not quite ready to make my prediction yet, but from what we're seeing here, I think it might be playing out a little bit differently than people were expecting.
Yeah, it is. It is kind of interesting, and when you look at just overall national statistics, right, in terms of scoring offense right now, points per game, they're on up there. I mean, right now, Oregon's 7th in the country, Penn State's 13th in the country in points per game. You filter that out versus FBS competition, it's in some ways even more lopsided. Oregon goes all the way to 6th, but from the model's perspective, gives Penn State a 1 point advantage, which, as you noted, when you take the home field advantage, maybe skews that to the 3.5. It makes sense. Has the yards per play slightly in Oregon's favor, 5.7 yards per play for Oregon versus 5.3 for Penn State. But the thing that I think is notable, Daniel, is it has the passing game in Oregon's favor at 8.2 to 5.7, but it has the run game in Penn State's favor from 4.8 to 3.8. We say this a lot, that the run game and consistency in the run game, especially if you can get up to 5 yards a carry, tends to be more efficient from a scoring perspective because you can get 20 yards in a pass play every 3 plays, and you're going to punt more often than not because the odds of you stringing together 3 non-productive pass plays, if you get 1 in 3 successful, is pretty high, right? It's sort of like you tell somebody you got to roll a 5 or a 6 to advance on a game of chutes and ladders. The odds of you rolling a 1 through 4 3 times in a row are quite high, at least by the time you move down the board. And every time you do 3 times in a row, you roll a 1 through a 4, you punt and you restart, and so it really disrupts your offense. And I think that's a little bit what maybe the situation is, where Penn State, they're not getting as big a chunk. The 5 or 6 means you move 5 or 6 spaces. Let's put it that way. They only move, maybe they only move 2 or 3 spaces. But the thing is, you got to roll, a 1 or a 2 in order to stop that, right? Like, as long as they're getting a 3, 4, 5, or 6, they advance. Well, it's a lot easier to roll a 3 through a 6 at least twice in a set and keep the ball moving than it is to do it the other way around. And I don't know if that analogy makes sense to people or not. Some will probably lose, some will get it. But it all plays out in the statistical numbers. It gives Penn State about a 24% advantage when they're running the ball. It gives Oregon about a 37% advantage when they're throwing it. Penn State's passing offense is about a wash with Oregon's defense, and then Penn State's run defense is at a slight disadvantage to Oregon's rush offense, which I think is underrated in all this. Their ball carriers have gaudy statistics. The problem, I'll say, is they played really, really bad competition that was also really compromised because they couldn't play enough guys in the box because they lacked the athleticism to deal with Oregon on the outside. Daniel, with all that, there's a lot of model stuff. The biggest thing that I take away from these teams, and it's when I look at the team stats, is you got a Penn State team that's in the 34th in passing offense for us, 35th in rush offense, 39th in pass defense, which isn't fantastic, but it's not bad. I know they're 13th overall nationally, but we're talking relative performance, right? How you do versus expectations, which is something our model, will take into account. Listen to our game recap from this week if you want to hear more about it. I'm going to try to save time and not delve into it. But they're 13th in the country in run defense in our model. And they're the number 2 scoring defense in the country in our model. Oregon, number 6 pass offense, not surprising. Number 31 rush offense, which is good. Again, scoring offense, actually, they fall from 9th to our version, they're 18th when you compare them to expected performance. But defensively, we don't have Oregon being particularly good. They're the 5th best scoring defense in the country. They're the 3rd best passing defense in the country in straight statistics. But in our opponent adjusted statistics, they're the 38th best scoring defense. They're the 38th best pass defense, and they're the 68th best rush defense, Daniel. And for me, from a prediction standpoint, in a game where, frankly, even, I did watch tape of these two teams, but they were playing opponents that were so overmatched, I could not take hardly anything from them that I didn't already know. There's not a lot to say there. But the one thing I can say is, at least in the numbers behind everything, and I saw it some on tape, there are signs that Oregon's run defense will bend. They did get pushed back at times. I know they haven't given up a ton of statistics, but especially given the competition level they played, they gave up the run a little too easily. They were not dominating the line of the scrimmage to the extent they probably should have from a physicality perspective. That does, to me, show a sign that Penn State maybe has the tiniest of edges. Because Singleton and Katron Allen are phenomenal backs. I'm a big believer in that running game. And the combination of size, speed, and power from those two seniors is just special. It is what Penn State wants to do, and obviously the thing that Penn State wants to be able to do is get into a game where they can run the ball with a high degree of success, enough to be able to put themselves in a position to win. And in that game against Oregon last year, Penn State ran it for 8.3 yards per carry, Daniel, 292 yards rushing. That was the second highest rushing total for them on the season, the highest per carry average for the season. Oregon is built to be a very fast, disruptive team. It's kind of how they play. It's like basketball on grass. Sometimes teams like Penn State are a very tough matchup for Oregon in a lot of different ways. And I kind of wonder if that's going to be how things plan out here.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point because it dovetails into my point about Allar last year. In that game where they scored 37 points on Oregon and ran up and down the field, it was complimentary football. Allar actually had a pretty bad game, 5.8 yards per attempt and two interceptions. Yes, he threw 3 touchdowns, but he wasn't why they won that game. But even with a low yards per attempt, he wasn't why they lost. And so that's what you need. If he didn't have the run game, I think that team falls apart. But they do have the run game. And you really did flag, or our numbers really did flag, that rushing yards per game, just how Oregon's opponents have done when they played teams not named Oregon has actually been a good bit worse than what they did against Oregon. They're 82nd in the country in rushing yards per game. And then per attempt, they're in the almost 40, and then points per game, almost 40. Even giving up 8 points per game, that's how bad their competition has been. Like, Oklahoma State only scored 12 points on Tulsa. Now, we say this all the time. Oregon isn't bad because they play bad competition. Oregon might be the best team in the country. We might see that, maybe we think they have scaling issues, but maybe more is what they needed to be consistent. We don't know. I've said this for years. People get all offended when they hear, well, you haven't played anybody. That's not offensive. That's just reality. Oregon hasn't played anybody. Oregon fans know this. They're big-time football enough to know this by now. But that also might mean that we don't know what we don't know about them that's bad. And I don't think they're bad. I think Oregon is a playoff team. I think they lose this game. Penn State 27, Oregon 24. Give me yours.
Am I allowed to pick the same score? Because I had the same score.
You are. We used to do that all the time. We haven't done this year.
I had the same score. I mean, I have Penn State 27, Oregon 24, which is really consistent with Vegas, unsurprisingly. I don't think I know enough about these teams. In particular, Daniel, I don't think I know enough about Dante Moore. And I know the feeling in this game is going to be that this is going to be kind of his coming out party or his litmus test. I don't think that's fair. I mean, they have a lot more on the schedule than just Penn State. I know it's not the toughest schedule relative to the Big Ten this year. I mean, anytime you dodge Ohio State, it's a big deal. But Indiana, I think, is a very good team. I think, you're going to beat Wisconsin for sure, but Wisconsin's a good defense. We'll learn something about more there. Iowa's not a great team. They've got a pretty good defense. You'll learn something there. I do think USC is a lot better this year than they've been. I think Washington's going to be pretty good this year. It's not a cakewalk. But I can't help the feeling that Oregon has not been in a truly hostile environment with this quarterback. He has not been forced to throw with, quickly through his progressions. He's either was in a position where he had way too long to make a play that he wanted to make, or he was able to throw to his first read. And look, Moore, when you talk about crazy arm talent, the thing that jumps off the tape is his ability to throw accurate footballs on the run. Not a lot of quarterbacks can do that. And there are a lot of quarterbacks, Jalen Milroe at Alabama is a great example. One of his big flaws, Jalen Milroe can't actually throw on the run very well at all. Like, when you watch him on tape, he's got to really awkwardly set his feet and throws inaccurate balls when he's running around. I mean, there are a lot of quarterbacks that are super athletic that can't do it. Moore can do it, and he can throw laser beams almost in a dead sprint, and that's rare, guys. And he can do it throwing across his body, which is rarer. But the thing with all that is, one, he has some bad habits in terms of leading the pocket. I still see it on tape. He's just played competition that's not able to run him down and contain him. That's going to cause negative plays. And even if you throw laser beams across your body, the reason you don't do that is the way the angles work and the fact that defenders are running to you. It is so hard to see cross traffic and so easy to throw an interception because the lane you think is there won't be there by the time the ball gets there. It's just, plus the fact when you're running one way and throwing the other, just physics, it takes velocity off the ball. The one thing people really don't appreciate, I think, with throwing the football is when you're running in a direction, physics dictates when you throw, the speed at which you're running is added to the velocity of the ball. And the opposite is also true in the rare instance you're running away from the throw, and really the only time that happens is when you throw across your body. I think we're going to see some warts from Moore, personally, I think it may not be true of him the rest of the year. I think it's just going to be the first time that he's really tested this year. And I think we will see the arm talent in a few splash plays, and I think we will see some negative plays. And I think the negative plays will be enough that it keeps them from winning the ball game. I think we're going to learn, obviously, a lot about both teams. It all feels cliche at this point, but I think cliche is all we've got because I don't think they played competition good enough to know who they are. I trust the run game at Penn State a little more. The numbers behind the scenes are telling me that there's a reason to think Penn State can run the ball more successfully, given the lack of information and how close it otherwise is from an eyeball test. I'm going to lean with it. And the X factor to me is absolutely quarterback play on both sides. Does Allar play closer to what I think his ceiling is, or is he kind of the guy he's always been? And on the other side, does Moore show himself to be a transcendental Heisman caliber quarterback, which I think is his ceiling, or when he's forced to process quicker, when he's forced to throw off his spot within the pocket, does he know how to navigate the pocket, or does he start creating negative plays because he can't find, if your first read's not open, can you find a second or third read? Or if your first read's not open, are you going to try to force the ball, or are you going to take a sack trying to extend the play, or are you just going to take the check down? Like, those are things that he has not had any real reason whatsoever to show on tape. And we don't know how he's going to respond. And that's going to be a big determining factor in this game that we're just not going to know till we see it.
There might be other previews that are better than ours, but I would bet my house that none of them have both a Chutes and Ladders reference and a physics lesson in them, like these guys got just right here. I'm glad you touched on Oregon's schedule, because there's a lot of people that will lazily, especially fans in the SEC, that will lazily look at Oregon's schedule, not see Ohio State on there, and poo-poo this schedule. But it's a good schedule. I'm glad you pointed that out, because Indiana's no joke. Washington, if you watch that Washington State game, Washington State's not good, but Washington brought it. There's enough good on this schedule. It's not like Indiana last year where you play one good team and you lose it and you make the playoffs. If Oregon is in the playoffs this year, and I don't think they have to win this game to be in the playoffs, they will have earned it with a good schedule. So I'm glad you pointed it out. Let us know in the comments what you think about this game, what the score is going to be. And don't forget, collegefootballnerds.com. It's free. You'll love it. Just do it. If you've hung on this long, listen to Josh's physics lesson. I've never even played Chutes and Ladders. So if you've hung on this long, you know that we got the good stuff for you. Go check it out. collegefootballnerds.com. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week, and God bless.